2040 BC. Nippur, the sacred city of Mesopotamia. Inside this ziggurat sat the most powerful institution on earth, the Ekur, the temple of Enlil, king of the gods. It controlled the grain that fed the cities, the silver that moved the economy, the land that powered an empire. In today's money, the Ekur managed assets worth over $3 trillion. And for 40 years, one man was stealing from it. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with something far more dangerous. A reed stylus and a clay tablet. He was the high priest, the sanga, the man appointed by the king himself to manage the wealth of the gods. And over 4 decades, he siphoned off the largest fortune in the ancient world. This is the story of the longest, quietest, most sophisticated theft in human history. And nobody knew a thing. 5,000 years ago, there was nothing here but mud and river water. No cities, no kings, no laws. Just families working the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. But then something happened that changed everything. The farmers started bringing their surplus to the temple. Grain in, protection out. Labor in, blessings out. It was the first economy. And the temple became the bank, the warehouse, the government, and the god. By 2100 BC, the temples of Mesopotamia controlled everything. 1/3 of all the land, thousands of workers, international trade routes stretching from the Persian Gulf to Afghanistan. They ran factories, thousands of weavers turning wool into cloth. They stored the grain that fed entire cities. They traded copper from Dilmun, lapis lazuli from Badakhshan, gold from the mountains of Anatolia, an empire of commerce, all flowing to one place, Nippur, the sacred city, home of Enlil, king of the gods, ruler of heaven and earth. Every king who wanted to rule had to come here first. No Ekur blessing, no throne. It was that simple. And in exchange for that blessing, kings poured their treasures into the Ekur. Generation after generation, century after century, the wealth compounded. The Ekur wasn't just a temple. It was the most powerful institution on earth. And to run this institution, you needed training. The scribal schools of Mesopotamia were the first universities. Years of training, mathematics, law, accounting, languages. Only the best graduated. And at the top of the temple's business sat one man, the sanga, the chief administrator, the man who ran the money. He controlled the grain, the silver, the workers, the merchants, the records, and the seal. That seal was the most powerful signature in the ancient world. And here is the critical detail that made everything possible. The man who controlled the wealth also controlled the records of that wealth. The scribes answered to him. The audits were compiled by him. He was the CFO, the tax collector, the warehouse manager, and the auditor. No one audited. The auditor, in the year 2080 BC, a messenger arrived from Ur. The king had chosen his new sanga for the Ekur, young, brilliant, from the finest scribal school in the empire. They placed the seal in his hand. They gave him the keys to the richest vault in the ancient world. and no one was watching. His first year, he did nothing. He watched, he listened, he learned. How the grain was counted, how the silver was weighed, how the records were kept, and more importantly, where the records had gaps. Then, in his second year, he made his move. Harvest season, 50,000 gur of barley flowing into the Ekur granaries. 50,000 gur, enough grain to feed a city for a year. Every basket counted, every cart weighed, every number recorded on clay. And the sanga watched that number climb, and he calculated exactly how much he could take. 500 gur, 1%, a rounding error in a sea of grain. He didn't take it all at once. A few baskets here, a cart there, spread across weeks. And then, the trick that made it invisible. Wet clay. Before it was fired, it could be changed. Once a tablet was fired in the kiln, it was permanent, set in stone. But before the kiln, the numbers could be rewritten. And once fired, the new numbers became the only truth. His tablet now sat among thousands, identical on the outside, a perfect forgery hiding in plain sight. Year 1, 500 gur of barley, converted to silver, no one noticed. And so the method was proven. Now it was time to scale. By year 3, the operation had grown. He invented people, phantom workers, names on the labor rolls that didn't exist, collecting barley wages that went straight to him. Every month, wages paid the ghost workers, collected by men who answered to the sanga, barley that vanished into his network. Then came the silver. Every trade transaction passed through the temple. Copper, tin, lapis lazuli, thousands of exchanges, each one skimmed by a fraction. A shekel here, 2 shekels there. Across hundreds of transactions per month, it was a river of silver. But he couldn't do this alone. He needed family. His brother at Pusrish Dagon managing the livestock, his nephew in the archives controlling the records, his son-in-law running a private trading house laundering the silver. 3 streams of theft, all flowing through family, all hidden by the man who controlled the records. And every night, he audited his own theft, cross-referencing his false records to make sure they held. 2% of the grain, 3% of the trade, 36 phantom workers collecting wages every month. And here is where the mathematics become staggering. 2 to 3% skimmed from every major transaction across the richest institution on earth for 40 years. The temples moved the equivalent of $80 billion per year. His skim, over 4 decades, touched assets worth more than $3 trillion. He couldn't keep it in the temple. So he built his own empire. The trading house washed the silver clean, bought and sold legitimate goods, mixed the stolen profits with real commerce, the ancient world's first money laundering operation. And on the surface, he was the perfect priest, generous, devout, beloved by the people. Every day he walked past the statue of Enlil, the god whose wealth he was stealing. And in Mesopotamia, there was one crime considered worse than murder. Stealing from the temple was stealing from the gods, and the punishment was death. He knew the penalty. He knew it from his first day in scribal school. And every morning he picked up that seal and chose to do it again. the richest vault in the ancient world. The door that should have been locked opened every day by the one man who should never have had the key. Grain skimming, phantom workers, trade manipulation, a family network, falsified records. One method, one family, one man who audited himself. Stealing from God. In Mesopotamia, the one unforgivable crime. The Ur, the Third Dynasty, didn't just build an empire. They built the richest civilization the world had ever seen. Trade routes stretched from the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Afghanistan. And at the center of it all, King Shulgi, the most powerful ruler in the ancient world. Shulgi didn't just rule the empire, he declared himself a god. And the temple that legitimized his divinity, the Ekur at Nippur. Shulgi lavished it with wealth. Silver, grain, lapis lazuli, copper, gold, thousands of laborers. Every year, more wealth poured into the Ekur than most kingdoms possessed in a decade. And who managed all of it? Who controlled every grain of silver, every bar of copper, every precious stone? The sanga, with the most powerful signature in the city. Every transaction, every shipment, every payment, his seal made it law. And no one questioned the seal of the sanga of Enlil. But here is what made this man dangerous. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was the most beloved man in Nippur. He fed the hungry during festivals. He maintained the irrigation canals. He kept the temple beautiful. Every visitor to the Ekur praised him. Every king's inspector left impressed. The inspectors saw what he wanted them to see. Full granaries, busy workers, clean records. And the moment they left, the mask came off. Because behind the beloved priest was an empire within an empire. 3 miles outside the city walls, he owned an estate that rivaled a governor's. Private granaries, packed with grain that should have been in the temple. Silver, lapis lazuli, gold. His personal treasury growing year after year beneath his private compound. 2 empires, one public, the humble priest, one private, the richest man no one knew about. The trading house was thriving. His son-in-law now ran the largest private exchange in the region. His brother at Puzurish Dagon had perfected the livestock skim. 50 sheep here, 100 goats there. Herds that were counted but never arrived. His nephew controlled the deepest archive in the Ekur, where the oldest records were kept. The network had grown. It wasn't just 4 men anymore. It was an entire family embedded across 3 cities. And somewhere along the way, the operation stopped being about survival. It became about power. The skim that started at 2% had climbed to 5%. He wasn't skimming fractions anymore. He was redirecting entire shipments. 25 years, not a single investigation, not a single question, not a single doubt. The empire ran audits every year, balanced accounts presented to the king's inspectors. But who compiled the accounts? His scribes. Who presented them? His deputy. Who verified them? The inspector, who saw what the sanga wanted him to see. The system was auditing itself, and the auditor was the thief. He stood at the peak of the Ekur and looked out over a city that worshipped him. He dined with king's envoys. He advised governors. He was consulted on matters of law. And the king himself sent commendations praising the sanga's management of the Ekur, faithful servant of Enlil. The king's own words, written on clay, sealed for eternity. The commendation sat on his desk. The stolen silver sat under his floor. Same room, same man. He didn't even look at the god anymore. He walked into the treasury, took what he wanted, and didn't even bother to close the door. For 25 years, the risk had been zero. But empires don't last forever, and neither does luck. For 25 years, the system worked perfectly. But empires don't last forever, and neither does luck. It started with the river. The Tigris ran low. The Euphrates pulled back from its banks. The irrigation canals that had fed the empire for centuries ran dry. And the harvest collapsed. Grain prices began to climb. Then they didn't stop climbing. 60 times normal. The price of barley exploded to 60 times what it had been a decade earlier. And they weren't the only threat. The Amorites, nomadic raiders from the western desert, driven by the same drought into Mesopotamian territory. They didn't come to conquer, they came to survive. And they destroyed everything in their path. Trade routes severed. Silver shipments from the east stopped. Copper from Dilmun stopped. The empire's arteries were being cut one by one. And then the throne changed hands. Ibbi-Sin, the last king of the Ur Third Dynasty, a man who inherited a crumbling empire and watched it break apart in his hands. Provinces began breaking away. Governors who once answered to Ur simply stopped answering. The empire was shrinking, city by city. And the central archives dried up. Fewer records, fewer inspectors, fewer reports from the provinces. The bureaucratic machinery that had tracked every grain and every shekel was grinding to a halt. And for the sanga, this was the worst possible news. His skim had been invisible because the surplus was enormous. 5% of a mountain is a pebble, but 5% of a shrinking mountain is a boulder. The famine asked a question no one had asked in 25 years. Where is the grain? His name doesn't survive in the records. History forgot him. But what he found changed everything. A junior scribe in the archive room, tasked with routine reconciliation, matching harvest records to granary counts. 2 tablets that should match didn't. So he pulled another pair. They didn't match either. Then another, and another. The discrepancy wasn't random. It was systematic, and it stretched back years. He should have reported it through the normal channels, and he did. He brought the mismatched tablets to the deputy sanga, the sanga's nephew. A copying error. That's what the nephew told him. Go back to work. It's nothing. But the scribe did something the nephew didn't expect. He made a copy.
My flock numbers don't match
and
the
he
records.
hid it
I sent
in his
more
own
sheep
home.
than they received.
And then the whispers started. A shepherd whose flock counts didn't match. A merchant whose silver delivery was under-recorded. Small voices. People who had noticed things, but had never had anyone to tell. The empire was collapsing. The famine was spreading. And somewhere in the archive room of the Ekur, the evidence was waiting. The king was desperate. Ibbi-Sin needed silver, needed grain, needed anything to hold his crumbling empire together. So he did something no king had done in decades. He sent auditors, royal inspectors, to every major temple in the empire. And for the first time in 40 years, outside eyes were going to look at the Ekur's books. The sanga did what he always did. He performed. He gave them the tour, showed them the temple, the renovated walls, the maintained granaries. But the inspector wasn't interested in walls. He wanted the records, the deep archive. 40 years of tablets sealed in clay jars. The sanga's entire tenure in one room. They opened the jars. They pulled the tablets. They began to compare. And the discrepancies were everywhere. Ghost workers on the labor rolls, missing grain shipments, silver that arrived at the Ekur but was never recorded. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an error. It was a pattern. 40 years of systematic theft, all authorized by one man. And then they traced the network. The brother at the livestock depot in Puzhrish Dagan, the nephew who controlled the Archon, the son-in-law who ran a private trading house. They found the estates 3 miles outside the city, a compound that would make a governor jealous. And inside, silver bars, stamped with the Ekur's own seal. Temple property in a private house. An entire parallel economy operating inside the temple of Enlil, an empire within an empire. But the sanga had one final move. Before they could stop him, he tried to destroy the evidence. Tablets smashed, records buried. 40 years of proof, and he tried to erase it in a single night. But there were too many. Thousands of tablets. The machinery he used to steal was the same machinery that recorded every transaction. He couldn't destroy it all. And there was one record he never knew about, hidden under a floor stone in a house 3 streets from the Ekur. A copy, made by a man whose name history forgot. They brought him to the courtyard, the same courtyard where he had fed the poor, where he had received commendations, where he had performed his devotion for 40 years. They took his seal, the cylinder seal that had authorized every transaction, every record, every theft, removed. In front of the temple he had ruled. In Mesopotamian law, stealing from a temple was stealing from the gods. The punishment was death. But before the sentence could be carried out, the Elamites were at the gates. The grain he hoarded could have fed the armies. The silver he diverted could have hired mercenaries. His theft didn't just rob the temple, it weakened the empire at the moment it needed every resource to survive. And the man who had stolen the empire's reserves was locked in the very treasury he had emptied. The Elamites crossed the border in the 3rd year of Ibisen's reign. They came for Ur first, the capital, the heart. The walls that had stood for a century held for 3 days. Ibisen, the last king of the Third Dynasty, was captured alive, taken to Elam in chains. The man who had sent auditors to every temple in his empire was marched east as a prisoner. He would die in a foreign land. The empire collapsed city by city. The administrative network Shulgi had built, the most sophisticated in the ancient world, went dark. But Nippur held. The sacred city, the religious capital. The Elamites had conquered everything, but even they would not destroy the house of Enlil. They burned Ur, they sacked Larsa, they razed the walls of Umma. But when they reached the Ekur, the temple of the supreme god, they stopped. The invaders left the Ekur standing. The temple survived the fall of the empire it was supposed to protect. And inside, sealed in clay jars, stacked on shelves, pressed into tablets, the records survived too. 40 years of transactions, 40 years of theft, 40 years of evidence, sealed in clay, sealed in darkness, sealed in the ruins of a world that had ended. Waiting. The clay doesn't forget. The cuneiform doesn't fade. The records don't die. They just wait. For 4,000 years, the tablets sat in darkness. Empires rose and fell above them. The Babylonians came, the Assyrians, the Persians, Alexander, the Romans, the Arabs, and beneath them all, the clay remembered. Then in 1889, a team from the University of Pennsylvania began digging into a mound in the Iraqi desert. They called it Nippur. The ancient world called it Nippur. They found the Ekur, the temple walls emerging from the sand like bones from the earth, and inside, the archive, sealed jars, intact shelves, 30,000 clay tablets waiting to speak. They lifted the tablets from the earth, brushed away 4 millennia of sand, and the cuneiform was still there, still legible, still testifying. Scholars began translating, and the story emerged. Not a story of kings and battles, but a story of grain and silver, of records that didn't match, of a system that had been hollowed out from within. The method the sanga invented 4,000 years ago is the same method used by every major financial criminal in modern history. Enron, they controlled the books. Bernie Madoff, ghost accounts, phantom returns. Wirecard, 2 billion euros that never existed. Every one of them, the person who controls the records controls the truth. The sanga was the first, but he wasn't the last. 4,000 years, one method. The person who controls the books controls the truth. From the Ekur to Enron, the line is unbroken. Today, the tablets sit in museums, under glass, under lights. Visitors walk past them every day without knowing what they're looking at. But this one, this small, unremarkable tablet, is a record of barley delivered to the Ekur temple, and beside it, a record of barley received. The numbers don't match. They never did. A human hand pressed these marks into wet clay 4,000 years ago. A scribe, sitting at a desk, recording what came in and what went out, doing his job, making a record, not knowing he was writing a confession for someone else. The clay outlasted the empire. The cuneiform outlasted the language. The evidence outlasted the crime. 4,000 years, and the numbers still don't match. They invented writing to keep track of their wealth. The last line, landing with maximum weight, long pause after. They never imagined it would also keep track of their sins.